Testing. Okay, is everyone ready? We'll begin. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Virginia City Council Chambers. This is the first Committee of the Whole meeting of fiscal year 2025. We'll call this meeting to order. Today's date is Tuesday, January 7th, 2025, and the time is 9 a.m. We have a full council and present today, and once again, to officially welcome at our first Committee of the Whole meeting our newly elected City Council member, Annie Bachschneider. Welcome, Annie. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll turn the council agenda or the Committee of the Whole agenda over to our City Administrator, Britt C. Bennis. Britt?
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is appearances. We don't have anybody scheduled today. So we'll go to number 2, which is approve the appointment of a team leader floater position.
And this is something that's proffered by the bargaining unit and then comes to the City Council for consideration and approval, correct?
Correct.
And Eric Moe has been selected to be the new floating team leader as proffered by ASME Local 454. This is something we've done before, and moving forward, this is just a new position, a new selection by the bargaining unit. So looking for council action or questions.
I'll move the approval of team leader Eric Moe.
Councilor Freely moves to approve the selection of the new team leader floater and Eric Moe for Public Works and through ASME Local 454. Is there support?
Support.
By Councilor Motley. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Bachschneider.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm curious, is there, as a new person, is there an interview process for this, or is it a selection? I'm just curious.
The contract dictates how this is
It's by,
defined.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We do an internal posting, they bid on it, we get the list back to the AFSCME union to vote to decide who they want to proffer forward, and then they bring the name to us, we approve it, they approve it, and then
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Any other further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion carries. Britt?
Thank you. The next item is approve the leave of absence request for a dual role firefighter EMT through February 17th, 2025.
And this is a recommendation from staff, follows all the rules and regulations and meets with the requirements of the personnel policy with respect to that. Is that correct?
Correct, and it is an unpaid leave of absence.
Very good, thank you.
So moved.
Move to approve by Councilor Johnson. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Councilor Freely. Further discussion. Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. I know we have had a discussion at Personnel Committee level regarding this situation, and I'm just curious, how long, I guess is there past practice or precedent, how long we extend unpaid leaves of absence?
Our personnel policy is up to 6 months.
Okay, and what length of time are we at right now? I think this has been extended. This is the third time, maybe?
2 months.
2 months. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, and the clarification is it's up to 6 months. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councilor Paulson. It has been moved and supported. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion carries.
Item number 4 is the resolution to award the bid for concrete crushing.
Okay, thank you. Jim, you're present here today. Any other issues with respect to that? I think there was a question about 50% is paid by the utility and 50% by the Public Works, and you have the money in the budget for that? You have the money in the budget for that? Thank you. Okay, looking for additional questions or council action with respect to the crushing contract as is alluded to and presented in your council committee whole packet.
I'll move the resolution.
Councilor Johnson moves to approve the resolution. Is there support? Is there support?
Support.
Support by Councilor Motley. Is there any further discussion? Councilor Bachschneider.
What is the timeline for completion on this project?
We mean the project itself? I think it's over the course of a period of time, but Jim Rosvid, our Public Works Director, will answer that for you, Councilor Bachschneider. Mr. Rosvid.
Morning.
Morning.
The project, what we've tried to do is
I'd like to see it start up maybe during breakup time is when road restrictions go on. So a lot of times we try to get the contractor in there during breakup before road restrictions go on so they can haul their equipment in there to do the crushing. And then they would continue until they've completed it. But we do have some street projects that are going on, and if that is continuing, contracts would also be hauling in concrete and blacktop at that time, and we could continue on that. And I would rather do that because we're paying that mobilization cost for the first time instead of having to have them back right away where we generate another pile. So if we can kind of push it along.
Thank you.
Answer your question, Councilor Boxer. Thank you. Councilor Beyondich?
Do you know how much is budgeted for that? And have we ever gone over budget on it?
I don't believe so. I know last time we were right within that budget around that, I think it was 80,000 for us and 80 for public utilities. And what that does is our cost, we pay $7 or $8 a yard or ton to have it crushed. Then there's a mobilization cost. And then we use that material after it is crushed. That becomes a modified class 5 for us. So that's all our material that we use for repairs, overlays on gravel roads, backfill, that where we would be paying $12 to $14 a yard to purchase that, plus trucking costs. And we're actually having them crush it on our site for probably 60% of what it would cost us to do it. So it's a win-win on both sides for us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Beyondich. Any other questions with respect to the crushing contract that's being presented today? It has been moved and supported. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Item number 5 is the request to approval of submittal of a letter of intent to request funding from the Army Corps, Section 569, Northeastern Minnesota Environmental Infrastructure Program related to disaster recovery. This would be for the dredging of the creek area that we know we need to maintain the creek banks to minimize flooding. We'd like to seek funding to go out for bids to have a contractor do that work rather than having to use city utilities or city resources to do that work.
Move for discussion.
Councilor Johnson moves to approve a submittal letter of intent to request funding from the Army Corps Engineers Fiscal 25, 569 for Northeast Minnesota Environmental Infrastructure Program. Is there support? Support by Councilor Freely. Further discussion, Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I see on page 7 there's a map that I'm guessing is related to it. What happens outside of city limits, like to the north of the creek and to the south of the creek? Are there any plans for cooperation with other organizations so that we're just not fixing the middle of the problem versus the whole creek area?
Jim, could you kind of give us a little synopsis and answer the question from Councilor Johnson? Thank you.
Yeah, with that, Silver Creek is a protected waterway. So that's a permanent area. That's our only permanent area in the city. There are 5 other outlets that we have coming out of the city. One of them, like you said, north side, one between the park, another one over by the ball fields. Those we can work with, and we'll do as we can. This is one that it's exceptionally large project, and there's several large culverts in there, probably $100,000 worth of culverts plus. If we can get some funding for that and help that and get to the Army Corps of Engineering involved in it, I think it'll save us, and the work can be done sooner. Like I say, it's a rather large project, so.
And Mayor, if I may, I guess my question is when we get past the city limits of Virginia on Silver Creek towards Mountain Iron, will there be other projects that you know of that Mountain Iron will do or the DNR will do so that we're not getting through the city of Virginia nice and clean and then we get out of city of Virginia and now the same problem is, so it's going to back up anyway?
Yeah, that's a good question, because, the state last summer actually went through and they, cleaned their lines under the highway there for the 169 overpass where it continues on there. They started that, they did their 2 last year, and now once we determine or decipher how much water we're gonna have, then they'll start working on the Mountain Iron end, and that all runs back kind of behind Silver Creek back there, and it runs out to 4 Mile Lake down off Highway 7. So it'll start up towards 3rd Street up by the lift station there, and it would continue all the way.
Okay.
But it's best to start on the one end and then work your way down, and you can size your pipes and that as you go, so.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Johnson. A quick question for me, just as a matter of information for all of us. So you've been doing, for the last couple of years, a lot of dredging, cleaning up, clearing that up to make sure that these flow, everything's flowing properly in the ditching area. So when you're looking, he's talking about 3rd Street South, you're talking in the Lencey addition off of 10th Avenue behind the Iron Tremors Event Center. There's a creek there, and you had indicated earlier that there's some significant work that's to be done to dredge it out, to clean it out, to help that flow. Is that still a plan to do so? Pardon?
That's this
That's
plan.
it, right, that's his plan.
Yes.
This is a plan to do so. This is where we're talking about.
Yes, and that cul-de-sac, I believe they call it Lonesome George's cul-de-sac.
Right, yeah.
That, that creek has encroached on those homeowners'
Yes,
property lines there, and this would relieve it where the water's actually flowing instead of sitting there stagnant all the time.
yeah, and I was there during the floods, meeting with all those residents there, and so I want to make sure that the public knows that this is the area they're looking at, those residents know that this is the area we're looking at, and it's a rather large, like you indicated, project, which is applying for this funding could for the Army Corps engineers could help us get needed funding to have a contractor come in and do all that project as much as they can, and with some in-kind services from the city as well.
Sir.
Thank you, Jim. Any other questions, Councilor Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. So I see that on page 8 is our estimated project cost, Matt and Jim, around $658,000. Is that correct? And then when I read on page 6, it says that we would have to share in some of the costs equal to a maximum of 25%. So could we get up to 75% covered with a grant from the Army Corps of Engineers? Is that right? So 75. So then do we have budgeted, I guess, have we allotted for 2025, 25% of the total project cost?
We're actually going to try to find it from FEMA, from IRRR, because the disaster declaration is the big word that they
Got it.
wrote in the email to us that says you really need to define it, that this happened because of the disaster.
Okay.
And then we're going to try to get it paid through either the Homeland Security Office of Minnesota or the Department of Safety Minnesota or some other way.
So there'll be ways to fund this outside of, because we probably haven't budgeted for this situation.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Paulson. Councilor Freely?
Yeah, I appreciate Councilor Johnson bringing that up, especially south heading towards 4 Mile, because I do have property in the Stony Brook section that abuts that Silver Creek and have had encroachment on my property as well because of beaver activity that's in the RGGS area. And I'm just wondering if the Army Corps of Engineers has any authority over RGGS to collaborate and cooperate in making sure that that continues to flow. Because that's true, if we're gonna be doing the middle of it and it gets backed up there in the southern part, that's not gonna be helpful to the project. So RGGS, I think, has to be a active cooperating entity in regard to this project, just kind of FYI. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. And as part of this process, it's a collaborative, obviously, and our staff, Mr. Rosvid and our engineer record, Matt Reed, will help work toward that. But I think we have to apply for this funding. We have to do our part, which to accommodate that, because if we don't and we wait for something else, we'll be in the same boat. And later on down the road, it's going to cost us a significant more money, that number one. But number two, this is a process that we've been following for the last couple of years to make sure we clear this ditching, at least within the city of Virginia, to try to accommodate that. So working collaboratively is very important, which to do so, working with the Army Corps of Engineers, maybe the IBB, and the Infrastructure Water Project at the state of Minnesota appears as though they might be putting some funding in the next legislative session to take a look at that as well. And we'll be talking for that to see if that's a possibility. But seeking all kinds of partners in which to do that just makes perfectly good sense for us. But we have to do our part to try to get this accomplished. And by applying for this grant is a significant step forward. So thank you. Councilor, anyone else? Anybody else? Okay, so it has been moved and supported? Is that correct? Is there any further discussion? Thank you, Jim. Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 6 is the proposed cable communications franchise ordinance.
Well, this is a COW at the COW. Can of worms at the committee of the whole meeting. So let's see what we can do here. As we take a look at this, moving forward and looking for council information, actions, questions, it is a problem for me that we don't have, the office of the cable company here. It's over in Hibbing. So, there's some issues we have to discuss. I looked through the contract and I have some concerns and some questions, but I'll hold those in abeyance for additional information or question from council. First of all, from left to right, Councilor Paulson, then over to Councilor Johnson. Councilor Paulson.
Mayor, if we look on page 22, it looks as though we are changing, with the red line, it says the PEG fee amount shall be increased by 3% annually, and such PEG fee shall be implemented by grantee on or before February 1st. What was the previous, was it just a status quo, no increase? So that we are now implementing an additional 3%? And does that follow the consumer price index, or which is greater? Would consumer price index be greater? And should that be the standard to follow, since we as a city are asked to follow that on certain contracts? But ultimately, though, that PEG fee would get passed on to the end user, so maybe that's not the greatest way to do it. But I'm just curious as to, that was the status quo for years and years and years. The PEG fee's never been increased. And the PEG fee goes directly to a fund that's set aside to be used to purchase equipment for public access. Is that correct? Okay. So I don't know if we want to have a little discussion on that. Then this contract was really hard to read through. It was really lengthy and hard to kind of wrap my brain around. But the question that I do have in terms of, I think one of the previous contracts stated that they were required to have an office location within the city limits of Virginia. And I just found out through the email, I think that Britt, you sent, that the last contract did not allow for that. So I'm wondering if that, Brian, can be added in, or is that something that's going to have MediaCom upset by? But I do know that I've received a lot of feedback from our constituents stating that it's very difficult to get a hold of MediaCom. They have to travel to Hibbing to return a box. Sometimes they wait for a very lengthy period of time, and a lot of times calls are not returned, and people that have maybe some transportation issues have a very difficult time getting there. These are people that are in some of the, like the Alice Nettle Towers. They're having really difficulty, and the rate increases have affected them drastically. So I'm just wondering if that can be added to the contract.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Brian?
Thank you, Mayor. So the answer to that question is probably yes and yes. So the document that you're looking at right now is the product of a negotiation that's ongoing. And so this is a term that the city could propose. I anticipate that for the last contract, when it appears that that term to maintain a local office was negotiated out, there was probably some business plan that MediaCom was looking for as part of that negotiation. That's probably why the office migrated to Hibbing. So to try to negotiate that term back into the contract may be difficult. So could it happen? Yes, it would take some negotiation. It's not necessarily a term that we could just impose upon them. And then the second question, would it upset them for us to try to push that term back in? It may.
So to follow up, before we go to Councilor Johnson, quickly to follow up on Councilor Paulson's question. A good business is prudent for them if they can't accommodate based upon what they did before, and they have an office in Hibbing, they should have some kind of a policy, and I know that we can't mandate that, to, if the people can't mail those boxes, they can't return them, they should have a program where the MediaCom people who are here all the time to pick those up on their behalf. So, I mean, I think it's prudent for us to maybe investigate that a little bit further. Thank you.
Mayor, if I may,
Yes, please.
I apologize.
Yep.
The negotiation may include things that aren't necessarily an all or nothing. I mean, if the concern is that we need a location that's established in Virginia where customers can make contact to return boxes and the like, maybe we attempt to negotiate a term in that indicates we'll have an office open X number of days per month or per week on set hours where returns can be made, just so that something is available within the city so our residents don't have to travel a distance to do business.
Thank you, Brian. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a lot of questions. Brian, I guess this is for you directly, and I'm going to ask it straight out. What if we don't renew a contract with them? What are the ramifications to us, our citizens, so forth?
Brian?
Well, essentially, it could result in the franchise going away. So the franchise benefits both the residents and the cable company. It gives the cable company some rights within the city, but it also ensures that we have some service that's available to our residents. Now, in today's world, is that as big of a problem as it has been in the past? Probably not. There's a much greater availability of online streaming services, of other providers that may be in the area that can provide similar services. There's Dish, DirecTV, there's those sorts of things. But this, theoretically, it could go away.
But that would probably adversely impact our senior population more than the working, the non-retirees, is what I'm guessing. Is it prudent, or is it time that we do a general RFP for our cable services? I know there's not a whole lot of options, but just for our own, we assume a lot of things. Maybe it's time we put out an RFP and see who's interested and who's not. And that's more of a thought. My other question is, it talks a lot about the PEG fees and cable, and so I don't get cable. I use MediaCom for internet services. Are we, as a city, benefiting from all the people who just get internet services from, I don't see, it says other forms of communication in this contract, but it doesn't spell out internet, and I feel like we're missing out on something there, and I'd like to see us maybe contact the League of Minnesota Cities. I'm sure they've dealt with MediaCom in multiple places to see if there's a better brand new contract that MediaCom has offered other municipalities that can help us service what we're getting, as opposed to what you were alluding to is back in the day where everybody had cable and you paid $12 and you got 5 channels and the local stuff. So that's something that I would, if you would please look into, so that we can make sure we're getting what we need and not what they want to provide to us. And my final thing is kind of more of a public service announcement than anything. Now, 2 of my friends have been contacted about leaking. apparently your cable can leak in your building and they need to come in and fix it. It's a legitimate thing. I've had two people, one person in Midway and one on Northside, they get contacted by MediaCom saying, we've detected a leaking of your signal in your building, we need to come in and fix it. I guess I do have a request. That is happening. If we can get some formal communication from MediaCom that we as a city can disperse saying, yes, this is real. These are the things you should be looking for if someone's coming to your house saying they're looking at leaking. Because the infrastructure is so old, the signal is, I guess, literally falling out of the cables in people's houses or on their way to the houses or something. So I think that us looking at this, this contract now moving forward, it needs to be more than just a discussion about cable and fees. It needs to be an overall service thing for our citizens, and that, if I don't know, I tried to look up my bill, but I can't remember my password if I'm being charged fees because I'm using city lines to get my internet, but I should be paying for that, and the city should be getting something back from that because of using our stuff. So I think this is going to take a while, and I would hope that we can come to a resolution that benefits our citizens more than it has in the past. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Johnson. So the goal is to review this and ask questions and look for other action before we move forward with a final contract. Councilor Bachschneider.
Thank you. On page 15, section 5, it's listed that it's a 10-year contract. I'm curious the reason as we have it be a 10-year contract versus maybe a shorter term contract, given the concerns that we have.
Brian?
Thank you, Mayor. So, Council, the term of this contract could be negotiated to be a shorter term. Generally, the reason in franchise contracts, they're longer term contracts is because a lot of times with the providers, there's some infrastructure, there's some costs, and they want to make sure that the contract extends for a significant enough period that they can recoup some of those costs. But again, it's all subject to negotiation, so it could be a shorter term.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bachschneider. Councilor Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilor Bachschneider, for bringing that up, because I feel like at the Cable Commission meetings, some of the frustration has been the actual length of time, that 10 years. And, you know, the length, 10 years, things are going to change probably drastically in this world. So I would like to see that, excuse me, shortened up as well. I don't know how short we can shorten it, but, and I think in your past statement, you said if another player comes to the table, we have to extend the same offerings. So I think a 10-year offering is a pretty long length of time. Maybe it's not long in the world of cable. And then to Councilor Johnson's point on page 33, section 4A, item 2 in red, it just says, in the event the grantee bundles or combines cable services subject to the franchise fee with non-cable services, and I would assume that's internet, that are not subject to the franchise fee, so that subscribers pay a single fee for more than one class of service at a discounted rate, the grantee shall calculate the franchise fee by allocating to cable service revenue no less than a pro rata share of the revenue received for the bundled or combined services. The pro rata share shall be computed on the basis of the published charge for each service in the bundled or combined classes or of services when purchased separately. So that's a mouthful, but my question is, so the city, we're not actually collecting anything on the internet, we're only collecting on the cable. So what is the advantage? I mean, where does the city get a benefit if they have a monopoly on the cable access? The only other cable, or excuse me, on the internet access, the only other internet, is it CenturyLink? What are our internet options here? How many options?
Cellular now has come into the picture, so now you can get T-Mobile, Verizon, or AT&T. You can get CenturyLink.
So none of those are subject to any fees from the
This is a
city?
cable franchise, so we would have to look at if we can do a telecom franchise.
So it'd be different?
Yeah. Yep.
Should we be looking into that?
Look and see if it's allowed, but it's been discussion in the legislature often.
It has been.
Yeah, so let me do some research
I would
on
be
that.
really curious on that, especially because I feel like probably a lot of people are bundling. So there should be some reasonable fee associated that the city should be collecting for any, it does state that they have to maintain all of their lines. So interesting that it's leaking out like that. But I'm not really sure that I'm comfortable moving forward with the contract as stated. I would like to see the length of term. I would like to see an office location. And then I would also like to explore what that telecom maybe fee should look like, or if any could be imposed, how it could be imposed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Paulson. All those, we're here to review the contract and take a look at what's recommended changes, whether it be or what we want to do with respect to negotiations. All those issues need to be addressed before we move forward with any discussion about approving a franchise fee. There are internet services that are available throughout Access North and all these other places that have that capability moving forward. For me, it's about being able to provide the necessary services to the public. So when you have Councilor Johnson, you have a leak, a lot of times you have a weak signal and they call it a leak. And so whenever you have a weak signal, and when I had the internet, I had weak signals, I would call Mediacom and they would come out and take care of it. No one ever contacted me about having a weak signal with respect to that. So that being said, I think some more discussion has to be made with respect to how we move forward with potential franchise. And I agree that the length of the contract should be less, but I do also believe that somebody from Mediacom, cable, somebody from corporate or somebody, and we had talked this before, Councilor Paulson sits on the Cable Commission, to get them up here to give us some information, to discuss things, to have these conversations. And a 10-year contract only benefits the Cable Commission, doesn't benefit the committee. So that being said, Councilor Johnson.
Mayor, I would move to direct staff to follow up on the questions and bring back further information as appropriate.
Okay, moved by Councilor Johnson. Did you get that motion? And supported by Councilor Motley. Further discussion. Did you have anything, Councilor Bachschneider?
I have one additional question. Thank you. On page 33, section B, it states, "City may regulate rates for the provision of cable service or any other communications service provided over the system to the extent provided under federal and state law." Is this something that the city currently does? Thank you.
That again, Annie?
Page 33, section B, "The city may regulate rates for the provision of cable service or any other communications service provided over the system to the extent provided under federal and state law." Is this something that the city currently does?
As we're doing the research here, Councilor Bachschneider, I think we have the authority, if I remember correctly, to regulate the rates higher than what the state and local franchise fee says, but let's get a legal opinion about that. So if we wanted to add some additional costs associated with the cable provider so we could provide more services, I think we have the option under the federal law to do that, but I think it's regulated pretty heavily. But let's refer to our legal counsel. Thank you. It's a very good question. Mr. Lindsay.
And the mayor is correct. So my understanding of the operation of this is that under federal law, we can add additional fees, but we can't drop it below the franchise fee. So once we enter into a franchise agreement, the recipient of the franchise has the ability to set some minimum rates that they would collect. So, and I don't believe that the city does add any additional fees to the cable franchise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bachschneider. Okay, there is a motion on the floor to direct staff. Is there any further discussion before we take a vote?
Yeah, I did want to point out, I did get a question
great.
yesterday asking about the liability portion of the contract, that if the city were to damage the lines when doing construction and such, it's a common clause, and it's in there because if we willfully or negligently, thank you, damage something without proper precautions or notice, then we would be responsible for doing that. we do, when we do our pre-construction meetings, and I know Matt and Jim can attest to this, we do invite MediaCom to all of them, all of the providers actually, telephone, cable, everybody, to let them know what we're doing, what the project is, what concerns they have, get their contact information, everybody has it, so if the contractor sees something that's not listed in the plans, they know who to call. So we do take our precautions very seriously, and the agreement is, we feel is okay, the way it's written, it's fine. It just states that if we negligently do something, we're gonna be responsible for putting it back.
Thank you, Britt.
Thank you.
Okay, it has been moved and supported. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
The next item is the proposed cannabis ordinance.
In speaking to other mayors as we discuss this, some of them, including Hibbing, when I talked to Mayor Hyduk, and other mayors within St. Louis County, they are adopting the county ordinance or mirroring that to some degree and making adjustments to that ordinance moving forward. So just some information. We have to have a cannabis ordinance, and I think the ordinance says, as presented, follows what the council's been looking at. So I move this to additional questions, comments from the elected body. Councilor Motley.
So are we going to set a time frame on when they can, or if we ever give out a license on when the hours of operation on page 62 in the yellow there? Do we have to set that now if we move this forward, or?
As we begin to answer that, we do have a moratorium on the cannabis ordinance, which started in July 17th of 2024, and for 1 year, although we anticipate to make that change before that year time is up. We have that little box of time anyway. Brian, any information with respect to Councilor Motley's question?
Thank you, Mayor. Yep, so we would, as a council, we would want to make a policy decision about whether or not we want to stipulate hours of operation, whether we want to have them mirror the hours of operation that are permitted for alcohol sales or some other benchmark, but we would want to have that included before we start making the consideration, the council considers it for passage.
So if this moved forward hypothetically today and then next Tuesday, do we have to set the time frame somewhere between now and then? Just for hours of operation?
Mr. Lindsay?
Thank you, Mayor. We would have to insert the hours of operation before we could begin the readings that are required for passage. So we couldn't move it forward and have that count as a first reading or something like that and then change it. It's got to be the exact language that we want to pass when we start that process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
And thank you, Councilor Motley. We are discussing this time. We're not making any decision to move forward. We have time in which to do that before we set that requirement. So thank you. First, we'll go to Councilor Paulson, then over to Councilor Johnson. Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a couple questions. Let's begin on page 61. And we're going to look at the requirements for cannabis businesses, the minimum buffer requirements. When this originally came before us, I believe it was 1,000 feet. That was coming from the planning and zoning. That was quite a while back. I don't know if, Jenny, if you remember that. And now it's back down to 500 feet of a school, daycare, or residential treatment facility, or a detoxification facility, or an attraction within a public park, athletic field, and then within 500 feet of another cannabis retail business. I feel that so what we're saying, and the last one is we're saying every 500 feet we can approve a cannabis retail location. Is that correct? Yeah, I'm not necessarily comfortable with that language. I don't know if we need to talk this out further, but I also have some concerns if we're treating this like alcohol. Say, like our attorney Lindsay just stated, if we're looking at this like the sale of alcohol. So, like, you can't go into a gas station. I suppose you can buy 3-2 at a gas station, but alcohol cannot be sold. It has to be on a you know, there's got to be in a liquor store, can't be in a grocery store, the actual liquor itself. So my concern is when I've gone into some of our local establishments that, and I'm not going to pick on one, but I'll just say it's a very family-friendly grocery store type situation. And right where you're picking out deli food, right above is all the cannabis products. And I'm very concerned, or the THC products, I'm very concerned that if we're treating this like alcohol and it has a legal limit requirement to purchase, why it is not, can we not say this has to be in a different section of your store, not accessible to minors? Can minors go into liquor stores? If they're accompanied by a parent, I suppose they can.
Yes, they can by law.
So my question is, though, is there a way to separate the location of such beverages so that it is not, you know, cigarettes are stored behind a counter. I'm just concerned as to how it's being distributed within these establishments or where it's being, I guess I would say the placement, when children are present and available, it's at their height level. And then the other thing I would be concerned about is the feet distance from those places that are listed on page 61. So if I could maybe get some feedback on that and maybe more conversation.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Paulson. I believe the state law has made some adjustments and some changes to the cannabis state law, which gives the city a little bit latitude in some areas, and that could be one of them. Mr. Lindsay?
Thank you, and I think the mayor kind of beat me to it. So there's your couple of questions there. There's a lot to unpack. Part of it is the current products that are being sold are being sold pursuant to, I believe it's some legislation related to hemp, and they're not regulated maybe as carefully as they ought to be or maybe could be. There was some conversation when those things initially came out that they would have to be sold from behind counters, and all of that stuff kind of went away, and we're kind of in the Wild West with some of this, the low potency stuff that's currently on the markets. The expectation, as I understand it, is that once the Office of Cannabis Management really gets up and running, and when they issue the regulations that will actually provide for legal sales of THC or marijuana in Minnesota, we're going to see some adjustments to some of those things. And I was trying to look quickly at the law as you were asking your question, because I know that the state law puts some limitations on how strictly a city can restrict or zone for the sales. And my recollection, without looking at it specifically, is that the feet from certain types of businesses or establishments was one of the areas, because what the state didn't want to happen was they didn't want cities to take and just extend those distances to have the practical effect of zoning out of town. And so there's a requirement that municipalities would issue at least one permit or one retail license, and then those restrictions were limited. I believe 500 feet is clearly within, and I'm trying to look here to see if I can find if we can extend beyond 500.
Okay, to answer your questions there, Councilor Paulson, for right now?
So we do or do not have the ability to extend beyond 500 feet?
Mr. Lindsay?
Thank you. I'm looking that up right now. Oh,
Sherry? Jenny, I'm sorry.
It could be either be 1,000 or 500. Those are the two distances.
And within that 1,000, if we change that, does that preclude anyone currently that would be able to sell to not be able to sell? Would that be an unfair? Are certain businesses closer to certain things? I'm just trying to understand in my mind what that might look like if the feet were extended to 1,000.
And we have zoning allowables within 1,000 feet, so we have that latitude for zoning purposes up to 1,000 feet.
Would we zone out any businesses currently that would be able to compete with one another?
In Virginia's downtown proper, probably. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Mayor. So that raises a couple of interesting questions because theoretically for the retail licenses, there's no businesses that are currently in effect. Those establishments are going to have to go through a permitting process. For purposes of the kind of the low dose stuff that's on the market right now, it raises a couple of questions. We would be essentially enacting a new zoning requirement. And the bigger question would be, are all of the establishments that are currently selling those low dose things grandfathered in so that they could continue their sales even though we would pass a new ordinance, unless and until such time as their use or that specific use is abandoned. So
That would be a good thing to, I think, to look into, and if they would be grandfathered, then you're not giving anyone an unfair advantage to, if you do change the feet requirement. I guess one of the big things I have, though, is the businesses within 500 feet of one another. Jenny, I don't know if it's stated in there anywhere, can you go beyond 1,000 feet on that specific item?
I believe that would be up to council.
So there's nothing that the state is saying that we can't put that distance at a much greater distance?
We can regulate zoning.
And so we're not bound by anything currently on that. So I would like to see that, that changed in there, and then I would also like to explore the 1,000 feet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Paulson. We'll go to Councilor Johnson, and then there's someone in the audience, so I think we'll allow them to come and make a comment or something, or provide some information. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you. I would request that we change daycare to child care. We don't take care of days, we take care of children. And it's a principle thing, but I think that's a little bit more clear on that. I just did a quick search, and I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that stores selling cannabis in the city of Virginia also produces tax revenue. According to the revisor min.gov. Anyway, it says in here that the commissioner must deposit the revenues, including penalties and interest derived from the tax imposed by this section as follows: 80% general fund and 20% to local government cannabis aid account in special revenue fund and local government cannabis aid account established in special revenue fund. And then I believe our 1% sales tax would also, does that apply to the sale of cannabis as well? So I think we need to be really careful that people are coming to Virginia, and if they're purchasing, again, remember that not everybody who's purchasing cannabis from a store is a drug addict or is looking to do bad stuff. Since the advent of the legal cannabis, many people are benefiting from pain relief, from sleep aid, from anxiety relief, all of those things. And the regulation is coming, but it is truly important to understand that we're not selling illegal drugs. Cannabis is in fact probably safer than alcohol when it comes to a lot of medicinal purposes and uses. And the regulation of cannabis occurred due to Big Pharma wanting to make more money on their drugs. The Native American people have been utilizing cannabis and other natural remedies for centuries without issues. So I just want to bring that perspective in and help folks to understand that this is not necessarily all doom and gloom. It's not going to create a place where drug addicts come just to get those folks are not buying the legal amounts of cannabis. They are not utilizing the very expensive THC cans at the local grocery stores to get high. People buying those are usually for recreation, just like alcohol. So I just want to caution us as we move forward to understand that there is a large segment of probably middle-class people that utilize cannabis in a legal and proper way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Johnson. This isn't for this probably discussion today, but There are some health and safety concerns, access to minors, all those kind of things that we need to vet out as well from our police department. And in speaking at some of these cannabis ordinance and then cannabis and how it's affecting others who currently provide that service, it can be, there's areas for abuse, but we're here to discuss the cannabis ordinance and how that moves forward. So I appreciate all the discussion. So I'm going to allow, first we'll go to Councilor Bachschnider, and then we'll have this gentleman come forward for a moment. Councilor Bachschnider.
Thank you. Over the weekend, I did go online and I found a guide for local governments on adult use cannabis. It was version 2.0, updated on November 21st, 2024. In that document, there was, in the appendix, it had one attachment that the ordinance is essentially what our ordinance followed as a guideline to follow. The question about how far away for a school and things like that came up in there. So in my research, it showed that the city can prohibit the operation of cannabis within either 500 to 1,000 feet. Other than that, everything it looked like could be 500 feet. Is that correct based on the research that I did?
Mr. Lindsay, I think I have some other information as well. Mr. Lindsay.
It's generally correct, yes.
And then it looked like that was all optional as well to list. You would not have to include that in an ordinance. Is that correct? Thank you. Additional questions that I have on page 58 in section 2.3.1 fees. There is talking about the City of Virginia's fee schedule. Is that fee schedule drafted, and where could the fee schedule be found?
Not drafted, and it will be done by
yet.
ordinance so that we can update it periodically without having to change the whole ordinance.
Thank you. Just looking through 1 second, please. For the hours of operation, one question that I do have as we're considering that, I look at like bars, they're able to extend their license to 2 a.m. potentially. Is that something that we could potentially explore if we do set operations? Could a cannabis selling organization choose to extend their sale of operation? This is just me asking a creative question at best.
Well, there is a state law that regulates hours of operation for alcohol, on-sale alcohol. And then it also determines that state law says 1 a.m. With the new addition to the law a few years back, cities can approve up to a 2 a.m. liquor license for that purpose. But as far as cannabis goes, we can regulate the hours of operation. There's no state guideline with respect to that. Am I correct in saying that, Mr. Lindsay?
Mayor, at this point, I believe you're correct. And then the other thing we've got to keep in mind, what we're primarily talking about here is retail sales licenses, and we'd have to make a distinction between on-sale, off-sale. I'll be candid, I'm not overly familiar with the laws or the regulations that may be imposed to regulate on-site consumption. I know that there's a cannabis events license that can be had, but I'm not sure. I've got to do a little bit more reading on the on-sale or the on-sale, basically on-site consumption aspect of it.
Thank you. One thing, and I believe that Jacob is here to talk about this as well. In the zoning, or maybe Jenny could talk about this as well. In the zoning, there is some recommendations on where and how many we would be allowing within the City of Virginia limits. And I don't have it highlighted in mine, but we have in section B1, we would allow this many. I don't know, Jenny or Jacob, if one of you guys would be able to talk about that based on recommendations. And I think that would answer the 500 feet in an area question.
Mr. Mayor, councilors, I'm Jacob Littler. Yeah.
That's the question that I have, if Jacob's able to answer it.
Oh,
Jacob,
yes, okay.
yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please state your name for the record and welcome to the committee of the whole meeting.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, city councilors, my name is Jacob Littler. I'm a commissioner on the Planning and Zoning Commission. And yeah, we did specifically limit, within the downtown district, we looked at, I believe we settled on one license for the downtown district and would only be available as a municipal license. So there would not, under the draft that we did, be an opportunity for a private business to be in the central business district. It would just be if the city wanted to do a muni, which I do encourage you to explore that as a possible revenue generation. You know, there's definitely some potential there in our central business district. And then when you look at our other business districts, we don't specifically limit, but it is conditional use. And, you know, you just get into what space is available in our B2 as far as, you know, you're looking at along the 2nd Avenue corridor and then in the mall area. So there's not a huge amount of developable space there or places where businesses could locate. But I do, you know, definitely understand the concern about you don't want a whole strip mall with nothing but cannabis retailers. And there is still a pretty strong distinction, as Attorney Lindsay was addressing, between the low dose, low potency hemp products, which are basically, yeah, the Wild West. There are regulations, but there's no enforcement at this time. OCM will be taking that over in March, and we'll see what they do with that. But that is separate from the cannabis retail, which is specifically licensed by OCM, and I don't believe that this ordinance would be able to affect the low potency hemp unless OCM changes regulations on that.
Thank you, Mr. Liller. I do have some more information about that. The Office of Cannabis Management, who's continually changing and restructuring and discussing some to fine tune this before the Office of Cannabis Management actually starts enforcing, regulating, and those kind of things. So they're still kind of in flex, and that's part of the legislative agenda for this year as well. So thank you for that, Mr. Littler.
And on the legal front, I would just double check on your moratorium too, because I do believe HF 100 superseded that, and all moratoria were abandoned as of January 1st. So any city moratorium that's in place is no longer in effect. And I would also encourage all of the counselors to take a look through the guidelines from OCM on how the retail businesses are licensed and what is required for security, for coordination with local law enforcement, for preventing diversion of product. It's heavily regulated at the state level. There's security plans required, and you know, I understand the concern with a business like this being on the leading edge of a new industry. There's definitely concerns for abuse and, you know, security, things like that. But I think you would be relieved if you look through and see what's required for the licenses and what kind of oversight will be there from the state.
Thank you, Mr. Littler, and that's from the local perspective as well, because it's going to be a difficult challenge, as it is with other states, and talking to the mayors across the United States about regulating is one thing, but the ability to enforce is extremely difficult in many areas. But we're talking about the retail piece of it, which makes it a little bit easier. Please continue, Councilor Bucksteiner, then we'll move on. Councilor Bucksteiner.
Thank you. So just to confirm, with the limiting to one in the B1 downtown central district, once that one cannabis license would be taken up, like with the 500 feet limit, that wouldn't be relevant really, like because only one is allowed. Perfect. So he did shake his head yes for those that are maybe watching online and not able to see. Thank you.
Correct. And just really quickly, there are many cities that are considering the municipal aspect of it for the tax revenue. Some of the citizens in some areas are pushing back significantly, some residents as a result of that. But it's like any municipal liquor store moving forward. We've never had a municipal before. We have the ability to consider that as we structure how we're going to regulate and finalize the ordinance. So thank you for all those great questions, Councilor Bachschneider.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councilor Motley?
Quick question. The county put a moratorium on also, did they not? On this?
They did.
When does that expire?
I believe they were scheduled to expire This spring, was it not, originally? I'm not sure exactly when, the moratorium. Yeah, July 25th, okay, yeah, that's when it's scheduled to.
Mayor, Jenny has the information.
Jenny, clarify, please.
The county's moratorium expired December 31st.
December 31st.
2024.
2024. It was expiration, as Mr. Lillard indicated, the moratoriums are superseded by the law that was passed.
Okay. I just want to also echo, well, at least Counselor Paulson, in as much distance as possible. So if we could go over 1,000, I would even support that. But by law, we are forced to have one license to give this out to somebody if we don't hang on to it ourselves. Is that correct? We don't have to do more than one, and we can hang on to it ourselves. Is that correct, Mr. Mayor or Brian?
I believe that there's some, whether the legislature added it in there, I think they're going to give us more authority to do more than one. But Jenny?
Thank you, Mayor. It's my understanding that one above and beyond the municipal license is required. So you can have the municipal one, but that you still need one other.
So they're forcing us to sell more in our city.
Well, if we have a municipal license, we have to give the private sector an opportunity to have one as well. So you have to have at least one. But if we have a municipal license, is that correct, Jenny? We have to offer another one.
I believe so, Mayor.
Yep, thank you. So that was my understanding as
I
well.
didn't realize that. Was that a modification since the original rollout when it said just one license per population on a particular city size?
Yes, and there has been, I'm sorry, Jenny, there has been some discussion about some of the changes that were made, and there's an attorney from St. Louis County, said to bring some from the state, the county attorney, assistant county attorney, who has a significant amount of information about the ordinance that St. Louis County has established, and she's very current on the law. It might be helpful, and I did talk to her after this meeting. She'd be more than willing to come and give a presentation to the council if the council chooses to do so, to clarify some of these questions that we have.
It actually sounds like a good idea, but okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilor Buckschneider?
So my understanding is that we have a public hearing set for the cannabis ordinance on Tuesday next week. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
We haven't established the ordinance, we're just having a hearing to hear from the general public with respect to that. It's not just, we're not required to have an ordinance set, all the questions answered. So we have the hearing, hear from the public, find out what's going on, get some more input before that is established and before the regulation moves forward. And then later on down the road, I think it would be prudent for us to consider inviting the St. Louis County Attorney on, because that presentation was very, very helpful. Councilor, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Again?
When are we hoping to have this ordinance established by? Or what's the timeline that we're looking at? Thank you.
Well, we need to set the timeline with respect to that. The sooner we do it, the better it is, but the goal and objective is to make sure we have our ducks in a row, I's dotted,
The
T's
state's
crossed.
going to issue the initial pre-licenses, and once those pre-licenses are issued, we need our zoning in place so we dictate where they can go. Because there could be somebody in Virginia that gets a license that we didn't even know applied for it, and then if we don't have it designated where they're going, it's basically open right now. I mean, they can go in any commercial district.
Good point, Britt. We have to have the zoning ones in place first before we can move, and that would be prudent for us to do that.
Thank you. So it is a pretty timely matter that we're looking at.
At least that portion, the zoning portion, and we can work on the licensing side, I believe. I think, Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, we have time for the licensing portion, but the zoning portion really needs to be figured out relatively soon.
Thank you.
Jenny?
Thank you, Mary. Correct. In the regard to zoning, if a license is issued, we would get a notification from the Office of Cannabis Management to ensure that it meets our zoning requirements. So that's why it's prudent to have the zoning in place prior to anything else. Thank you.
And do I also remember reading that anybody that is issued a license is then grandfathered into it as well at a later date if any ordinances are put into place?
Brian?
Generally, yes, that's, if you establish a legal use and then zoning changes around it, you get to continue your use until it's abandoned.
Thank you.
And I think that follows the logic and the policy about other areas too. So if we want to regulate something, whoever's there, that's grandfathered in until, yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you, Councilor Boxleiter. You had something, Councilor Beyondich, and then we'll move back over to Councilor Paulson. Councilor Beyondich?
Thank you. When will they start issuing these licenses?
That's a great question. They had started the pre-lottery and then they got a lawsuit that stopped them. So it could be whenever the lawsuit, I don't know what the plan is. I don't know if they have a plan. I don't know if Jacob knows any idea.
Yeah, there's some other lawsuits pending as well. Mr. Littler?
They threw out the pre-licensing. It's done. OCM will be sending out information on February 18th, starting a new, so anybody who made it through the pre-licensing is automatically through to the general lottery, and then they will reopen applications. They'll be announcing that on February 18th. As far as timeline after that, who knows? OCM has been a little rough.
Yes, that's for sure. Thank you. Anything else, Councilor Beyondich?
Yes, thank you. I am curious. I know when this first came to us, Chief Maddie came and spoke. And as much good as there is and as much revenue as there is, she also brought up points of staffing and what can happen. So I would really like to hear also from her, so we have a full picture of what we're looking at, the repercussions to the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, following the state law regulations about issuing the license is one thing, but it's the regulation enforcement of it, which is going to be a big challenge as well. Councilor Beyondich?
Thank you.
Yes.
And I'd be curious to know on how they feel about the feet, the distances. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess I wanted to get clarification on the taxation, because I felt that when Chief Mattson was here, there's no tax that we
Changed that.
collect.
That was a statute change in the last legislature that
Okay.
it is subject to the sales tax, just like everything else.
So it's subject to that plus subject to the 1%. So that was changed. Okay. And then with the public hearing, are we going to notify wherever the, I guess, the districts, the business districts that would be potentially affected? Will they be notified by mail that this public hearing is going to be happening, since this will be affecting or potentially affecting where these businesses reside?
Jenny?
I don't believe that's how the public hearing notice is sent. I believe it's sent to the paper and, presented as a public hearing notice, but not specifically to individual businesses or addresses.
Okay, so when we did the rental code ordinance, did we send out those letters to landlords to let them know? I believe we did.
Yeah, that wasn't a public hearing. Those were a series
It
of
was
public
just for,
meetings we
yeah, it
did.
wasn't for the hearing, but it was for registration and,
A series of public meetings we did. We did meetings targeted towards property owners, towards renters, towards,
Yep, and I remember the three when John Sullivan was
Yeah,
here. I
yeah.
believe that we did notify, though, the people that it would have affected.
certainly, downtown would be easy. To hit the other business commercial might be a little more difficult, but we certainly can try to get as many as we can.
That would be my recommendation,
Yeah.
so you have as much input as possible
Absolutely.
from that district that might be, or those districts that might be affected. The other question that I had is, within members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, is there any conflicts of interest in having discussions if you are involved with any of the business aspect? Is there any conflicts of interest that are going to be coming forward within any members of the Planning and Zoning Commission?
if an individual on the Planning and Zoning Commission, if you could answer that question for Council Paulson, has a conflict and is part of this business and making decisions based upon as Planning and Zoning Commission, does that particular commissioner have to recuse himself from consideration in that regard, if they're not personally benefiting from it, or if they are personally benefiting from it?
Thank you, Mayor. So I think it would be kind of a process. So if there was, say somebody on the planning and zoning was seeking a license and seeking to establish a business, I think they would need to disclose that, make sure that the balance of the Planning and Zoning Commission was aware of it. And then you would have to look at each individual case. Obviously, the conflict concern is that that person not use their position as a planning and zoning commissioner to influence the planning and zoning regulations to benefit or to establish that they would be the only one that could get a license, or that they would be insured to get a license or something like that. So you'd have to make sure that they didn't have a direct personal financial interest in the decisions that were made.
Okay, and is that currently the case? I just want to clear the air. Are you, as a commissioner, are you currently involved with any of the business side that would impact a potential conflict of interest?
So I am a part of the group that is operating over in Mountain Iron at I have a 2.5% ownership stake. The Planning and Zoning Commission members are all aware of it. I announced it immediately when the cannabis ordinance came up for discussion. We have no plans at any time to operate in Virginia. So in discussion with the Planning and Zoning Commission, they didn't feel that there was a conflict there. If at any time our plans change and we were looking at locating in Virginia, I would immediately make the commission aware of that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Littler. So would it be prudent, or can it be done at this public hearing? We're going to be providing as much information as we can with respect to this cannabis ordinance. Could we, if her schedule permits, the Assistant County Attorney to come and give a little presentation at this public hearing? It was very informative, and I think it would be informative for us and for the general public as to how this works out. So she is the designated cannabis relations expert, so to speak, from the St. Louis County Attorney's Office. So could we invite her to come and give us a presentation if her schedule permits? Yes, let's do that if we could, if that's amenable to the council.
I will move that.
Moved by Councilor Paulson to invite the Assistant St. Louis County Attorney to the public hearing, provides accommodates her schedule to provide some additional information regarding this ordinance to the general public. Is there support? Support by Councilor Schneider. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one more motion to direct city staff to notify as best of their ability those who would be impacted in any of the zoning districts as described, that they would be given written notification of the public hearing.
Thank you. And that could also extend to a ad in the paper also of information. So thank you. Moved by Councilor Paulson. Is there support? Support by Councilor Beyondich. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Anything else with respect to the review of the proposed cannabis ordinance? Okay, thank you. Next item, please, Britt.
Thank you. The next item is discussion regarding the solid waste fees. As we had discussed back earlier this year when we were talking about the equipment bond, we talked about if we could cancel the purchase of the garbage truck, and at that time, we were told, no, it was too late, it was already on its way. Fast forward how many months now, and it's still not here, it's coming next week, I believe, Jim? Garbage truck?
Mr. Rosvit, we expected to deliver the
week.
garbage truck next week? We do.
Do.
Okay, thank you.
When we approved the purchase of the garbage truck back in 2022, we had planned to have enough funds in 23 and 24's budgets, solid waste budgets, to pay for the garbage truck, and unfortunately, we found ourselves that we're not in that situation. We don't have enough funds. So we will have to look at either, first and foremost, we'll write a check to pay for the garbage truck upon delivery like normal. We will just have to figure out how we're going to pay for that. It's going to come out of the solid waste fund, which will deplete the fund completely, 100%. It only has a few $40,000, I believe, or so in there. So we'll have to look at a rate increase for garbage. decide to do that, we'll have to either or we take out a bank loan, which I don't suggest that. I think we just do an interpersonal loan from the city. Do we want to pay back, what time of a time frame do we want to pay back the general fund for this purchase? What kind of a scenario? And at what level do we raise the garbage fees, knowing that if we keep the garbage service, there's another truck coming that we're going to need to purchase. It's a 2-year build time. It takes 2 years, we need to work our way up to that as well. However, I did a lot of research on all this, as I promised I would, starting back in August. I did a lot of research. I've talked to the MPCA, and I've done a lot of investigation. The city is currently using an organized collection system, which means we invoice the residents for the garbage fee on our utility bill. However, because we issue solid waste licenses, and we've done this for solid waste licenses for as many years as I've been here, before that, many years, it's 99, we are actually an open collection system, so our ordinance is not correct. And so the MPCA said that your ordinance is woefully inaccurate and that you need so much more clarification in there than what you have as a suggestion. She had directed me to this really awesome best practices page that they've created for cities, page 75, 76, 77, and 78, that tells you how to create your ordinance to a good model, a better model, and a best model, so that we can make our ordinance a little bit more, word I want to use, a little more in compliance with state statutes and state regulations. So 2 things when doing the solid waste fee. Garbage truck's coming, how are we going to pay for it? Number 2, I need to update the ordinance, and I would like council to give me direction on how they think I should proceed with updating the ordinance. Should we look at a good, better, or best kind of change?
Okay, so what I'd like to see first, if that's amenable to the elected body, we need a motion to direct staff to update the ordinance, solid waste ordinance. Councilor Motley.
Brian, would the recommendation possibly for updating the ordinance be on the recommendations of the MPCA, or what would that motion look like, Britt or Brian?
Mr. Lindsay?
I think the motion could be just to direct staff to prepare an update of the ordinance in line with the direction that we've received from the MPCA, because the ordinance will have to come back before the council for final approval. So it's just authorizing them to do the work.
Okay, and would that be amenable to you, Britt? Yeah. That's what you're looking for? Okay, I'll make that motion.
Support.
Okay, motion by Councilor Motley and supported by Councilor Bachschnider. Did you get that? Okay. Any further discussion real quick? And going to the update ordinance, but however we do that, part of that should be the fee schedule as we currently provide the services. So we're woefully undercharging for the service that we need to provide. We're one of the lowest services, if not the lowest service in the area for garbage fee. And that's why the solid waste fund is depleted significantly. The costs associated with the disposal, the increase of the tipping fees, the cost for equipment is all risen, and we haven't adjusted the rates in which to do that. So that's also part of as we look at the ordinance moving forward. So it has been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know if page 66, if this is where we should be inserting this discussion point, but I'm a little confused on the actual resolution that was passed September 13th, 2022. It says, whereas this purchase will be split between fiscal years 2023 and fiscal years 2024 budget. So are we saying that we don't have the money, that we didn't set that money aside, and now we have to take it out of the solid waste fund in 2025 to pay for the delivery?
In 2024, we have not done any set aside of anything yet. Right now, the 2024 fund is, we haven't got like December's payment for our funds yet. We're sitting at $14,000 is what we have in revenue, excess revenue.
Okay, but in the actual resolution from 2022, it states this purchase will be split between fiscal year 2023 and fiscal year 2024 budget. So that should have been removed out of both 2023 and now this year, 2024 to cover the total purchase amount, and that's what we were told when we voted on this. So I'm not understanding why that money was not set aside to make this purchase, as it was stated between those 2 years of that budget, those 2 budgeted years.
Thank you. Hold that for a moment. Sherry?
You can't get blood out of a turnip. If you don't have money to set aside, you can't set it aside. And if you recall, in 2023 and 2024, there was quite a heavy discussion about the levy. And we cut you guys down to the bare bones. The tipping fees went up drastically. And that was notification like in November after the budget. Then on top of it, the auditor, we did not restrict the funds. But there was no money in this enterprise to do this. And this is going to be something you have to be aware of as you go forward, because vehicles, they doubled. Used to be around 120, 25,000. Now we're talking $300,000. Doubled after COVID. You can set money aside, and we do have investment. We could take from our investment and pay ourselves back.
I'm just concerned because I voted yes for this based on the fact that we were budgeting for this. And now I'm extremely concerned that we did not, I mean, it says right in there, the purchase will be split between those 2 years. So that should have been allocated in the budget in '23.
If we didn't receive enough payment in, there's nothing to allocate.
Then what's to,
The tipping
then why
fees.
should we continue to approve purchases when we don't know how we're going to get the funding like we just did with the ladder truck?
This is not the general fund budget. This is an enterprise.
I understand
And
that.
it doesn't make you enough money to budget or to take this away in '23 and '24. There's just not enough funds in there without raising your garbage rates.
But if we knew that, why wasn't that increased? And I'm not trying to be challenging, I'm just concerned when I vote for something to purchase a piece of equipment, you know, we've been purchasing a couple different items now, and now I'm worried that we're not going to have the funds going forward, whether it's an enterprise or a general fund purchase. So I don't know how to solve for that when now you're saying we have to pay this bill that
Then
we
how we
don't.
solve for it is we're going to need to increase the garbage rates. That's the point of what I'm trying to get at.
Exactly.
And I need to know what you want the garbage rates to be. Do you want to plan for the future, or do you want to just pay back what this equipment? What would you guys like to do?
And when did we know that we did not have the funds to purchase this vehicle?
We talked about it in August.
So we knew there was going to be a shortfall big time.
Right, and that's why the council directed me to go out for an RFP.
Yep.
That's where we are. We're at this point now that we have gone out for the RFP, we have done the interviews. The truck is coming. We were trying to stop it from coming. We couldn't get it to stop.
All right, thank you for that information.
Thank you, Councillor Paulson. We'll move to Councillor Motley, then to Councillor Johnson, and then to Councillor Bachschnider. Councillor Motley.
In lieu of certain things, with the garbage coming, I'm not hiding anything, but future garbage trucks, things, just the possibility of outsourcing our garbage, do we have to make I know we already have a motion on the floor for something else, but do we have to, on segueing to the garbage truck, do we have to make any motions on that today, or can we wait a couple weeks?
We can wait a couple weeks on the fees. It's just, keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to have to increase garbage fees to pay for this truck. I mean, how are we going to do that? We have the money to write the check today. We're not have to turn it away.
But we don't have to make that decision for a couple weeks?
Correct.
Just in
Correct.
lieu
But
of
just keep that in
others?
the back of your mind. The longer we wait, the more we're waiting on collecting revenue from.
Would it be your recommendation to hold off on further discussion on paying the garbage
Yes,
truck for a
and-
couple weeks?
And the ordinance it would give me time to work on the ordinance too in the next couple weeks. So yes, it would be great if we could do one first.
Okay, so
ordinance
just the
first.
ordinance.
Thank
Okay.
you, Liz, for clarifying that. Yes, the one first would be great. Let's start with
Okay.
the ordinance. Let's digest the information about the garbage truck. What's the best way to pay us back? I don't think we need to do a bond, and I don't want to do a bond because that takes time, and that would cause a panic. We don't want to do that. We want to do this in a good, exercised manner, controlled manner, and really think about this for a little bit, about what we're going to do.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Motley. Counselor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this kind of gets looped into the whole unintended consequences of passing such low levies for 2 years. We're scrounging around for a lot of things. Fees have gone up for a lot of things. And we have had, previous councils have had a tendency to push things off on the next council, especially during election years. I think that it's really important to realize, just this morning, Tuesday's garbage day in my alley, and I took pictures of 6 garbage cans that were not overflowing but were on the garbage on the ground. One of them being mine, and I know full well that people stop in my alley and dump in their 300 gallons. I am paying for people who do not live on my block, who do not live in my house, to have garbage disposed of. That is why however we move forward, I want my own can. I want to pay for the garbage my family uses. I want to be able to recycle. It'd be perfect to have curbside recycling that I know is going to get collected. And I think that's the larger challenge here as we look at this, is people are sick of paying extra fees, but we're paying extra fees because anybody can use our dumpsters. People can use City Hall's dumpsters. They just pull up in their minivans or their trucks or their Subarus, and 3-4 bags go in, and people know when garbage is collected in different spots around town. My alley's Tuesday, and usually Wednesday morning, we're half full already, and that's after a full dumpster. And I've had the discussion with all of my neighbors. I know all of my neighbors. And so that is where the frustration for me comes in, is paying for people who live out of town to dump garbage. My friend lives on an avenue, so there's days we sit and watch 3-4 cars that don't live in that neighborhood stop at that garbage can, and out comes a couple bags. And so I think that's the part that I'm hoping that we can get a hold of, because that'll help for folks to just pay for their garbage. I know there's a few businesses now in town that are using an outside management service, garbage management service of some kind, and I applaud them for doing that. It's probably reduced their garbage bill, because now they're just paying the flat fee of having garbage. And so I think the sooner we can get the ordinance passed to allow for everybody, for others to come in, the better. And whether it's, I don't want to see anybody lose their job, but that would entail buying different garbage trucks that can handle the smaller cans. And the ability to have various size individual cans is also important. I think one of the people we interviewed has little tiny ones, as well as service fees for if you can't get your garbage out, someone will walk up and get it from behind your garage and get it. So I will be supporting and making sure we do get an updated ordinance for our garbage, and then it's much easier for people to understand how we can move forward from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Johnson. Counselor Bachschneider.
Thank you. I do have some additional questions on this topic as well. I do believe there's a motion on the floor right now. Can you repeat back that motion and support? Thank you.
The previous motion was for the ordinance, and that's been taken care of.
Did we vote on that? I don't believe we voted on that yet.
I think we still have to, we're still in the discussion portion of that. So we'll continue to discuss until we call for the motion to be voted upon.
So the motion is moved by Councilor Motley, supported by Councilor Bachschneider, to allow staff to update the solid waste ordinance to become in line with the recommendation from the MPCA.
Been moved and supported. Further discussion. You're good? I'll go back to Councilor Paulson.
And I don't, that's why I asked if this was off topic, because I feel like the motion on the floor is to review the ordinance and change the ordinance. But what I'd like to see happen is I would like to see, so let me ask this question first. Do we have the ability, if garbage collection service changes in the city of Virginia, do we have the ability to sell the new vehicle that we will be purchasing?
Mr. Lindsay?
Theoretically, yes. If something were to change and the vehicle no longer had value to us or we weren't going to use it ongoing, we could declare it surplus and sell it.
So it would have to be declared surplus at that point? Could it be negotiated into any new contract that would be coming forward if potentially there would be a contract coming forward?
With the private hauler?
In that scenario, you would probably want to just lease the vehicle to the, if you're going to have somebody else use the vehicle, you'd want to enter into a lease allowing them
But
to
there could
use
be
it.
some sort of negotiation
Correct.
that transpired.
To sell it, you would necessarily have to declare it as surplus.
Okay. And then that being said, what I'd really like to see is, Britt, would there be a way that we could come up with maybe some bullet points for the Virginia taxpayers, for the residents, to understand the whole conversation behind this, from the MPCA dialogue to the expenses that the city is incurring, to potential savings, to potential discussions that were had to hold costs down, and that when we talk about, when you guys go forward with reviewing the ordinance or redoing the ordinance, that it's just communicated very well as we can to the general public why we are going down this path and why we need to have these conversations, and that any rate increases wouldn't be because of a potentially new service, but they are based upon the fact that this truck has now been delivered. The enterprise fund did not have enough money in it, and that would have been required to be discussed regardless whether we're talking about a new service in Virginia or not. So if that could be clarified in bullet points to the general public and put in the packet for review when we come back to this, I would greatly appreciate that, so that just so that the general public has an understanding and an awareness of why we are even talking about this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Paulson. And by notifying the general public, we will be providing, like we always do, input from the public with respect to any ordinance changes that we're going to be making sure that they're aware of it, make sure that we can ask her any questions, have the bullet points available from staff in which to help answer some of those questions, to field some of them that's anticipated. But from my perspective, we're going to be voting on the changing of the ordinance. That's the motion on the floor. So as part of changing this ordinance, we're going to be talking about what has to be done, and that's what we're doing right now. So for me personally, regardless of whether you have the city services, whether you have a private hauler, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever for us in respect to how the ordinance works in this one respect, and that is fees. So if you go to a private hauler, your fees will likely rise. They're not going to have the same fees that we have because it can't be supported. So if we keep our garbage service, and we're going to be talking about the ordinance, part of the ordinance should be, you're going to have to increase the fees. We're the lowest around. Nobody wants to pay more money, fees for garbage, but it has to be done one way or the other in order to maintain the integrity of the solid waste fund. When your tipping fees rise significantly, you don't get any rebates on anything from the county with respect to recycling. You don't have any other options moving forward for revenue stream. And the revenue stream for the solid waste comes from who? The taxpayer. Where does that come from? The levy. And so fees will have to rise. We're the lowest in the area. So part of this ordinance has to address the fee schedule and how we can continue to operate a facility or the services and provide the necessary revenue to put in an enterprise fund, which is established for the sole purpose of funding that service. And we don't have the funds to do that because our rates are way too low in that regard. Councilor Motley.
Just two things, Britt. Do we, just random thought here, do we have anybody interested in our garbage trucks? Oh, okay. And then the other thing is, I just want to make this very clear to the taxpayers in this city. This city is not looking to raise your garbage rates if we don't have to. By outsourcing, it is very possible you are going to be saving money, and that is our intent, is to try to find ways to save you money instead of continually raising your rates. So the intent is, if this city chooses to outsource, we want to find a way with outsourcing to reduce your rates and not have to potentially continue to increase them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Martin. I think that's voting for discussion moving forward. A good point. Councilor Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to point of clarification that increasing or decreasing the levy does not impact an enterprise fund. The enterprise fund is based upon the fees collected. So whether we decreased our levy or increased our levy, that has nothing to do with how much money is in any enterprise fund. So that's a misnomer that I think that the taxpayers need to understand, that because we reduced our levy, that doesn't mean the enterprise fund was reduced. It just means the fees didn't cover the costs. So I needed to make that clarification. And any levies increased is specifically for the general fund unless it's part of our debt service. So that's a clarification. The second clarification point that I want to make is, as sitting on part of the interview committee, there is in fact an opportunity for people that don't have a lot of garbage to be able to choose their size can, and in fact to be able to cut their garbage rate in half if they don't use a lot of garbage, so they can choose the size of the can based on the garbage usage that they have, and that rate is actually half of what they currently are paying. So that's another thing that needs to be stated. There is an opportunity for the taxpayers to save dollars, and we would be having to increase rates regardless because of the delivery of the garbage truck and because of contracts that are currently in place with the AFSCME union regarding the wage increase over the course following the 3-year contract. So those need to be clarified and made clear to the taxpayer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Paulson. Just to clarify a little bit with respect to the levy, if we don't raise our rates, or if the rates aren't raised, or we contract the service out, and we're in the position we are now, and there's not enough money to cover the fees associated with the solid waste, which includes the purchase of the garbage truck, and we choose to continue operating, and we need to purchase the garbage truck, or there's not money in the solid waste account to which to do that, we don't have the fees to cover that, that equipment purchase, the cost associated has to come from somewhere. And there's only one place it comes from, the taxpayer. So if you don't have the money there, you have an equipment bond that moves forward. So if you don't have the money we don't have in the solid waste, that money has to come from somewhere. So it could, not say it should or it would, could be affect the levy down the road, and that's what we're trying to prevent. And I appreciate your point of a point of order there, Councilor Paulson. Any other comments? Councilor Bachschneider.
Thank you. On page 64, the second paragraph states that at the time of the purchase, that we overhauled our garbage rates to cover the cost of the capital purchase. And then I understand the paragraph following that states that due to the increase of the refuse that we haul, that it wasn't enough to cover this. And that was really what Councilor Johnson was talking about. Then I believe last month we did increase our rates for our sewer fund, which I understand is a different thing. The question that I have is, when we raise our rates for things in the city of Virginia, how can we guarantee to the public that years from now when the purchases do arrive, that the money is there when we're raising it for a specific reason? Thank you.
I think the rates have to coincide with whatever our 5-year equipment purchase plan is, or whatever they do. We have to account for that, not just 1 year, 2 years. We have to have a 5-year vehicle or equipment replacement schedule, a 10-year replacement schedule. We've been using a 10-year bond in which to accomplish that in order to catch up with the equipment that we purchased. So that's a very good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I mean, I have other questions, but I think with the related more to the truck and not necessarily the
Okay,
fees. So
all right.
I think with the motion on the floor, we'll come back to more discussion after that, I'm assuming.
Sure, certainly. So there is a motion on the floor, and would you please read it back, Pam, before we vote? It has been moved and supported.
Moved by Counselor Motley, supported by Counselor Bachschnider, to allow staff to update the solid waste ordinance to come in line with the recommendations from the MPCA.
Okay, is there any further discussion on that? Counselor Johnson?
I would say at the best level. There, since you presented 3 levels, I would like to see the best level option.
Okay, very good, thank you, Counselor Johnson. Further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion carries, thank you. You have something else, Counselor Bachschnider?
Other questions I have relating to just the truck overall and plans to make payment on it when it does arrive. Where did we plan to pay for the truck when it arrived if we weren't planning to pay for it out of the solid waste fund?
We passed a resolution, okay, Sherry, go ahead. No, go ahead, Sherry.
Counselor Bachschnider, this will come out, it will be charged to the solid waste fund. It will show a deficit. And even if I had budgeted in 23 and 24, it would have showed a deficit. So it will show a deficit.
Thank you. What is the current balance of the solid waste fund?
I believe that's on page 69. These are doubled, so. I want to say it's around 50,000, 48 or 50,000 when I looked. I don't have my paperwork in front of me. 59, here it is. Bert, could we get this any smaller?
I know. And we have,
$56,416.
we have not received December's utility bill payments yet either, so.
What is the budgeted income for 2025?
I believe I emailed that to you this morning.
I'm just hoping that we can do some math. One thing that the memo stated was that at the end of 2025, if we do not have enough money in the fund, that we would have to transfer from the reserve or general fund. So I'm going to ask what the budgeted income for 2025 is and what the anticipated expenses are, and then going to just try and do some math to see, are we going to anticipate even having enough at the end of 2025 to pay for it?
No, your ending net revenue will be 48,000 and some odd dollars at the end of 2025 if you keep your current rates.
Not include the purchase of the truck.
Thank you.
So just like the golf course and a few other enterprises over the years, they carried a deficit. This will carry a deficit.
Okay, thank you. So can you state one more time, I'm sorry, for what the budgeted income is for 2025 and what the expenses are for 2025?
I do not have that documentation in front of me, and I don't have photographic memory. I do know that I emailed you, it was about 1.55 million, and then the expenses, leaving a balance of $48,500.
And that's best estimate for the end of 2025. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Counselor Motley?
So Sherry, is it safe to say our garbage is not making money in its current rate form?
In its current rate form, and we are also looking at a recycling truck. Am I not correct on that, Public Works Director?
We are looking at purchasing one.
Yeah.
There's a lot of unanswered questions.
So it's just going to go up. So.
And I understand the difficult position that you're in, Jim, with respect to this, so thank you. Anything else before we move on? I think this is looking at the garbage, vetting out the garbage truck is something should be on the next agenda for us to specifically delve down and get some additional information from our staff, but we're welcome to continue to discuss this. Councilor Motley.
I guess I just wanted to clarify to the public that in our current form, our garbage does not make money. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Motley. Okay, do we have any motion on the floor? We've voted on that. We just had an ancillary discussion with respect to this. I think it bodes for more information from our finance director to answer Councilor Bachschneider's questions and others as we move forward. So, Councilor Bachschneider.
Thank you. The memo also stated that we could explore doing a bank note or looking at things. I'm curious what the benefit of doing a bank note or looking at our other funds or doing a transfer, those sorts of things, and then what the recommendation of city staff would be at this time, or if that's waiting until the established ordinance in place is. Thank you.
I think these are options that were disseminated by our finance director for us to consider moving forward, how that's going to happen, and those discussions will continue. And if some additional information is required or some factual accounting or some specific costs associated, cost-benefit analysis, income as opposed to deficit can be provided by our finance director to answer those questions that you have. I don't think she has the answer right now. And that's for us to determine how we're going to pay for that based on recommendations from our finance director and staff and information that is being gleaned and disseminated from other sources of opinion and fact based upon the information that's provided to councilors individually.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. If we get some more information with respect to that, maybe answer the questions that Councilor Bachstein had and others as we move forward with the establishment of the orders. I think we'll vet out that piece as well about the garbage and how that moves forward with potentially purchasing capital equipment and all the pros and cons of how we're moving forward. And once again, I know, Jim, we hear from one side and the other, but we have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that we provide the services necessary. And the fund's not available to do that. We don't have the mechanisms in place. Those are decisions we as a council will make one way or the other, whether continue with the current course and make some adjustments, or we find some alternative ways to provide the service to make sure that the public is not significantly adverse affected and still has the services provided. So let's move on to the next item on the agenda, please.
Excuse me, item number 9 and 10 on the agenda are both closed session items. The first one is discuss the Rockridge Youth Hockey Association Facilities Use Agreement, and the number 10 is to discuss the Animal Contract Control Services. And then I do apologize, Sherry did pass out a resolution for transfer of funds for the 2024 street project that we need to approve also.
Okay, before we make a motion to go into closed session, there's one item, resolution, and do we have that in their packet?
It was handed out today.
Okay, this is a new resolution that came forward, and it's the resolution, and I'll have our city finance director explain this. It's the approving of the transfer, number 1, from the investment accounts held with the 4M fund to the city's general fund. This is money that we had left over that we're holding in abeyance to help pay for some of the costs of the public safety center.
No, sir, this is for the streets.
Oh, for the street project. Okay, so the resolution says as follows, and I'll read it because you don't have a copy of it right now. Does everybody have a copy of it? Okay, then we're good. So just take a look at that and look for council action.
I will move the resolution approving transfer number 1 from the investment accounts held with the 4M fund to city's general fund.
Thank you. A motion by Councilor Johnson. Is there support? Is there support?
Support.
Support by Councilor Beyondich. Is there any further discussion? Could you explain this a little bit first, Sherry, and then we'll go to the council for questions.
Sure. When we initially got our 2024A street bond, it was in the amount of $7,225,000. We did not need the full amount sitting in our checkbook, gaining 0 interest. So in July, we requested that we deposit $4.5 million into a sub-account, and the interest we have gained in the 6 months that it's been there is $117,324.
Okay, and
That should make you feel a little bit better. And what I'm asking, and it's because I love living like this, you know. These CDs don't mature until January 31st of this year. I don't want to be penalized by taking it out early. So we've worked with our 4M investor, and he says the day that they mature is the day that he will also do a wire transfer, because we have bonds coming out on February 3rd. So if I get a few more gray hairs, because, but in the meantime, he said, there's like a little bit about 500,000, about $500,000 that is sitting in the money market right now. So we're going up to, we're not going to take the full amount if we don't have to, so that we can still gain some more interest. I mean, I'm going to send you, council, exactly, but we're making over a 5% interest. So I don't want to get penalized and take it out early. So yeah, it's, I'm asking up to this amount. Me and Britt figure maybe we can still keep about 875 in there.
and so this would be, resolution would be effective after January 31st?
I need the resolution effective for the January 14th meetings.
Effective January 1st. Okay, thank you. Questions? Counselor Paulson?
Sherry just answered them. Thank you. Thank you, Sherry.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Sherry. Other questions? We have a motion and a support. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so looking for a motion, and we'll go into closed session to discuss item 9 and 10.
So moved.
With a
Moved
short
by
break.
Councilor Beyondich and supported by
With a short break.
Councilor Johns for a short break. Hearing and seeing no other opposition, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, motion carries. We'll be going to closed session after a short break. Thank you.